now. Exciting. So welcome to the meeting number 3 of Movement Validation. We have our usual cast of characters today, and I think we have some cool stuff to talk about. I don't think we really need to do intros today. I think everybody knows one another at this point, so we can just skip right ahead. Why don't I give my update first, and then we can just go from there. So a couple of weeks ago, I presented our vision document to the OpenWorm core team at the core team meeting, and basically just outlined what we talked about many times: the cloud implementation of movement validation, built using Python SciPy. Hopefully we'll have a computer vision algorithm by working with the Brown Lab, and went over all of that. So everyone seemed pretty excited about that. And recently I've worked on grouping all the GitHub issues into 4 milestones. So now every issue is grouped into one of those 4 milestones. So we have milestone number 1, features, statistics, fitness function. And if we completed this milestone, we would complete our minimum viable product, because we would then be able to close the loop with Geppetto, at least with already segmented video files from the Schaefer Labs Worm Tracker 2. We still wouldn't have the computer vision step in there to be able to segment new video files or segment them ourselves. But we would at least have our minimum viable product. Milestone number 2, the computer vision, which we're having a meeting with the Brown Lab over tomorrow. So if anyone's interested in joining that, just let me know. But that's at 1 o'clock my time, 3 o'clock Eastern. And milestone number 3, cloud. So that's what Joe Bowen's been working on the past couple of months. And it's basically just putting everything, computer vision algorithm, the features, statistics, fitness function, everything into a cloud instance so that everything can be hosted there. It also covers the database work that we're doing. And then finally, a category testing / documentation for a 4th milestone there. And Phil did some conversion from Markdown to RST last month, so thanks to him for that. And so we've been working on getting our documentation in Sphinx and improved in that sense. And also, I know that Chris Lindsay, you volunteered for the task of having better documentation for some of the features, like an example of how a feature is exactly calculated. So that's an issue that's grouped into that milestone there. So as we work on that, we can discuss that within that milestone. So as for me and my work, I haven't done that much coding in the last month, but I do plan to continue work on that milestone number 1, which is in particular for me would be work on the fitness function stage of that closing the loop. So linking the statistics to some kind of scalar output that tells you how closely the experimental worms match the simulated worms. So that's basically the overall of what I've done. Jim, I don't know if you want to go next.
Sure. First, I had just a couple questions. Where are we on the features and statistics, or I guess statistics processing? I think at one point, so there are 2 steps in that. One is a histogram calculation. In other words, just to sort of summarize the data over the video, we compute essentially distributions for that. And I think that had been pretty close to being finished. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's completed. And then the second step, I guess, is taking those histograms and then performing statistical tests on groups of histograms, groups of worms, and their associated histograms, and finding, I guess, p-values, basically, validating the hypothesis or null hypothesis that the experimental worm is matching the simulated worm, or that one group of worms is drawn from the same distribution of worms as the other. And that code is also, it should be there, should be complete also.
Okay. And have you shared with the group our alternative, I forget what the method is called, like local outlier estimation at all? If not, I can mention it briefly.
No, yeah, and in fact, I think that was a topic, it was a conversation we had a while back where I was asking you, yeah, how in the heck do we aggregate all of these 700 different measures of the worm together in one scalar value? And you were suggesting that might be the right approach. So yeah, feel free to lend
Yeah,
your knowledge on that.
I have a few statistical approaches in mind for just overall fitness functions. But I was reading a website and it pointed to a link, which I think I hopefully have on my clipboard. One of the best articles I've read in a while by this website called Analytics Made Skeezy. Anyways, the basic question I sort of had was, even with all these genetic mutations, they're all still sort of worms. And can could you throw all of these things together and then still take your worm that you had generated, and maybe let's say you don't match the normalized worm, but you matched an UNC8 or what, I don't know what the naming convention is. Maybe you happen to match one, and then maybe that gives you some information to say yes, you're close, but not as close as you could be. Anyways, it's a really interesting article. In this case, they're trying to find a mole for drug dealers, where basically the idea is on a case-by-case basis of parameters, everything looks sort of close, but when you go into a higher dimensional space, everyone that's is sort of close to each other in high dimensional space, except for the sort of the outlier. In this case, potentially the simulation. And so the thought is, can we sort of add this as an additional test to just, I don't know, I think it might be interesting to do. So we should throw that up there as an issue.
That article is really cool, and the example that it gives too. It's a colorful way of illustrating the point.
I laughed a little bit reading that as I was walking into work. Anyways, I just wanted to make sure that you hadn't talked about that before, so we should throw that in as an additional function.
Awesome.
Okay, on to a few things. I guess I'll just talk about one today. And maybe I'll bring up a couple other. But the main one is we have this pipeline in place for taking videos that have been processed by this GUI and then calculating features and statistics from it. What we don't have ready currently is the ability to take data from other videos or data from simulations and run into our pipeline. And so what I've been doing is basically saying, if you can give me a contour and a skeleton currently, and I might just pare that down to a contour, my goal will then be to get it in a format by which our feature processing pipeline would work. So I've started on that, and it should be relatively easy. And then the goal is, I basically the data I'm working with is data earlier in the pipeline from the Schaefer lab. And so that when it's done, it will hopefully match up with our normalized worm, which is currently our starting point for feature processing. So that's how I'm going to validate it, and hopefully I get exactly the same thing. And once that's in place, then ideally someone else could give me a contour and a skeleton, and then I could provide all these wonderful features for them. But at that point, I do need an alternative example. So I don't know who is closest to doing this, and and frankly, we could just start making up numbers. I know that at one point the Schaefer lab had talked about how close they could get into making something sort of look real just based on some first-order heuristics. Anyways, it'd be nice, though, if we had someone who was actually using this. And the first person that came to mind was someone like Tom, where he does have skeleton data, and it'd be nice if we could see what problems we run into in trying to actually meld it in, because there's always the first level pass of things seem to work, and then there's a second level pass where it's like, oh, when you actually try and use it for someone, you're like, oh, I forgot this, I forgot that.
Sorry, Jim. Who do you mean by Tom?
Portgeist. I
Oh, Tom.
apologize if I'm
Oh,
pronouncing his name
yes.
wrong. Sorry, Tom. Um, yeah, so that was at least one of the people that came to mind. Two problems, or a few problems that I'm currently aware of, just for reference. One is going to be, I'm pretty sure in Tom's case, he is only doing a skeleton-based implementation, whereas preferably we'd be going with a contour-based implementation. The problem with that is there are certain things that depend. If you have the contour, you can get the skeletons. If you have the skeletons, maybe you can get the contour, but for the most part, you're just sort of making up an artificial contour to get the pipeline to all work. So maybe we need to. We'll figure it out at some point. The other big issue that we're going to start running into is some of the feature processing code is specific to files that have been generated for the GUI. Most notably, things like when there was a stage movement or not a stage movement, when there were parsing failures or there weren't. But we'll run into those things when we run into them. It's just having an example and trying to actually work through something will be useful, and hopefully we'll be there relatively soon. That's pretty much it on my end. Maybe one other thing, and Michael, if you could mark that in, or Stephen, or whoever. I still want to send something out in general to the whole team about styles for coding. I know Chris Barnes had been a big proponent of that, and some additional things I thought about were tools, so we could provide links to how to use GitHub. If you're coding in Python, what platforms are useful? How do you make installs of necessary repositories, et cetera, and then importantly, stylistic issues. Because as we get more and more people coding on it, it'd be nice if we were all sort of doing the same thing rather than just creating little bits of messy code that no one really wants to ever use a second time once they've been written.
There was this issue here, issue 52, make sure code follows PEP 8. So we ran some automatic code to do that. I guess, who was it that did that?
Yeah, so PEP 8's great, but it's a start. Anyway, I think I'll try and send out within the next week a big email about it, and really the goal I think is maybe even to start a new repository, which is basically like, how do you handle coding, especially with the volunteer organization in mind. So when we have someone start up that's like, what is this GitHub you're using? We can point them to that, and it's not like we need to have our own unique material, but at least if we have link outs to our own material, or it's like, you want to start coding in Python, how do you do that? Here are the programs we're using, these are the advantages and disadvantages of them. PEP 8 also doesn't, there's certain things with style that PEP 8 doesn't cover. There's lots of ambiguity even with that style in place. So anyways, I'll send another notification out there about that, but I figured I'd mention it now.
Jim. So, awesome stuff. I'm pasting a couple links here, though, in the chat. So there's sections for this stuff in the OpenWorm docs, and I think it'd be awesome is if you an email is good, but if you could like format it in documentation style or whatever, or even just, I mean, whatever, send the text and I can format it if the RST is a barrier, but to put it up there, I think would be very powerful, and it's already got a spot for like, how do you use GitHub, because I actually pretty regularly have to point people at that. And then, yeah, the part with like Python coding standards is pretty minimal, but can totally be extended. And yeah, we're just adding to the pot. So I would say definitely like extend it rather than like starting a new space for that, because that helps absolutely everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is something I thought about. I think the one thing that's intimidating for me is the organization and how to best potentially even start a new page, because I think there's lots of information. But yeah, I think that I would like to put it through the docs, and we'll communicate a little bit more about that as time goes on. Yeah, but I do see a need for it.
It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, so just like any of these pages, right, in the upper right-hand corner, you can. There's a little link that says edit on GitHub. Here, let me just show you real quick. So the way that I usually do this when I'm trying to get stuff done in a quick and dirty fashion is, so what the previous link was, coding standards. So where is it? Right. So here's the coding standards thing. So I'll just scroll up and I'll click edit on GitHub, and then it'll take me to the community page, and then I'll just go ahead and hit edit, and I'll just edit it in my browser, okay? And I'll, like, whatever it is that I have to put in, I'll just, boom, I'll make the change here, blah, 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 blah. And then now, and this is, I think, getting better recently, depending on what level of access you have, it'll actually commit it directly, or you can just create a new branch, which then puts it out somewhere where we can all look at it before merging it anyway, which is nice. So if it's just, in terms of just like modifying a page, and I would suggest you just start with that before making a new page maybe, that's easy enough to do, and then we can all easily review it. So just in terms of low friction. And
sure, that sounds great. We'll start with that. I sort of envisioned having lots and lots of things there, but I think I'll then let you make some stylistic choices as to how to reorganize things once the content's actually there. We'll go with that approach.
Yeah, I'm happy for you to like file an issue in the docs and says like make this a new page kind of thing, and let people who's like more comfortable with that stuff take it over. That'd be awesome.
Great, that sounds good. Right. And then I guess one other thing, and maybe I don't know how much we talked about last time, is documentation for the features, and that's in place. It just needs someone to take over it. So I guess maybe that's something Chris and I can work on. But I still have an interest in getting that going, because especially once we start outputting these things, I think that'll be useful. Right now they're a little bit abstract even for me after having basically coded them like 3 or 4 times. So anyways, I think that's it for me.
Cool. Joe, I have you next here. Do you want to deliver an update?
I guess I don't have much of an update. Like I was speaking earlier, I kind of want to get the AWS moved over to OpenWorms. Other than that, let's see. I mean, a couple of the things I wanted to do is go through and I got to add some documentation of the cloud stuff, and then I'm just looking at the issues here. We do have one issue with the REST API in the video, and I want to take care of that. But that's.
Oh, I saw that one. That outstanding issue on the on your repo, right?
Yeah. Did we get the repo moved over?
No, it's still sitting under your name also. So that actually, maybe I should add that to the.
We should probably do that
issue I created for that. Yeah. So move them both over. So Stephen, this is the idea. We have this movement validation cloud. So the idea would be to put this into the OpenWorm group. So is that fair enough?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please.
Cool.
If it's something you need more permissions for, you should have them. But
okay, fair enough.
You're trouble let me know.
Okay.
And then the other thing was, my thought was, are we on the right track? Is this what we were looking for? Do we need other things to make it usable or useful? Where do we have to go from here to make it useful, is what I'm getting at. I think we need to determine that, and I'm not entirely sure what that is. Maybe it's just that we need to start using it. Maybe it's that we need to turn our scripts around to start using it. And I'm sure it's a little of both.
Yeah, it's tough because there's this parallel effort here where we're working on the feature statistics fitness function piece. We're also obviously meeting tomorrow about computer vision, and really the cloud application is not going to work in the sense that it's going to complete its job until we have some way of taking videos and segmenting them, and then taking those segmented files and applying our features and statistics and fitness function to them. So we can do the latter, but we can't do the computer vision step yet. So a big repository of videos isn't going to be much use quite yet.
Sure.
So yeah, so the parallelization of this whole thing makes it a little bit awkward to get a nice payoff at the beginning of this cloud work, that's for sure. I think that what you demoed last time, though, I think that the broad outlines of it is the right idea, in my opinion, where we have this web interface, we can see links to being able to edit the database and add things and view the videos. That's exactly what we would want to do at this stage, I think. Setting up that skeleton with the data infrastructure there.
Sure, and I guess it's okay that we don't have instant payoff. I think what we want to do, though, is that we've got these two lines, and we want to make sure they merge at the end.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where I say hopefully they're not parallel. Do we have specific goals for the cloud based code that we can point to and say, yeah, we've accomplished something with this, or where are we at with that? I mean, I have certain ones in mind myself, but I'm curious as to the group's opinion.
Well, I think that's what we need to make, and maybe we need a starting point. If you've got some ideas, maybe I'm sure I've got a few ideas. Let's figure out. Let's start a document. We can probably do that in the GitHub and start a document for where we want to take this.
Well,
yeah. So there's Sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, one thought is, have we added anything about the cloud app to the documentation yet, in terms of having people use it? Because we could, for example, if there's like a quick tutorial, like a quick start guide, or how to start using it, then we can actually have people like using it. Like whatever bit of functionality, I realize that it's there's functionality missing, but whatever bit of functionality is actually working, if we get some people using those core features to start with, then I think we can create a positive feedback loop of people like trying stuff and then stuff maybe not working, or the stuff that does work, like building out from there, right? Just have like a little practical core that creates, additional motion forward.
Okay, so it sounds like one of the things we need to do is get good documentation on the whole project right now, and that's me lacking. I apologize for that, not doing it from the start, but I think that can be one of our goals to help intersect eventually.
Yeah, and what I would emphasize here is really like it's very easy for perfect to be the enemy of the good with this. Like we don't have to have like a fully complete massive like documentation site to make like progress. We would literally just need like the most minimal quick start guide just on a page or something, like do these like 6 steps kind of stuff, maybe with like a couple pictures. So if we can just do a very quick iteration that gets something out there that people can read and use, like then we can iterate on that and improve it.
Okay.
So yeah, I just wouldn't bite off more than we can do with that.
Sure.
I've got this here, for example. Here, I don't know if you guys can read this, but I took Joe's great work on the cloud here, and I in doing it myself, I had to figure out how to install it, and so I documented my steps here at least to be able to install everything. Really, from an end user perspective, all you need is this step right here, which is to see the site live and click right here. And that's it. And then here's the site right here that Joe created. So I don't know how much documentation you'd need to just jump right in. Hopefully it's relatively intuitive to poke around at least, but I agree that more documentation would be better.
I think one of the areas where I'd like to see documentation is on using the REST interface with Python. Because since our scripts are in Python and we're ultimately looking to interface this with the cloud, I think a quick overview of how that works might help.
Yeah, connecting the actual feature processing to this cloud app and being able to call the features calculation from the web interface here, I think that would be a major step forward for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Joe, your tutorial was this great example of, some documentation that made a process more accessible for other people. And just thinking, from the open science community perspective, we've always got new volunteers coming in. So docs that just like explain stuff that we all understand already, but that make it clear for other people. Like when you're using the app and you're poking around, like you click here, you do this one operation, like here's what's happening, like in a couple seconds, something. Just stuff for like a couple features is then going to help a lot of other people. And then on the Gitter channel, for example, we can say, hey, here's some docs, folks, try it out. Does it make sense? Does it not? So then we get some people using the app informally. So I think that's kind of what I'm thinking would help create a good loop. Yeah.
Well, I think currently though the web interface is almost useless if it's not interfaced with scripts.
So then we need to like pick like 2 scripts or something to actually connect it to, and so that's kind of the thing, right? Which is like you'll write the tutorial and you'll be like, does this actually work? And then like, if not, then implement. So it kind of requires some thought as to like what should be the first thing that we can let people play with, and then it's like usability first kind of idea.
I have a few comments, if I might. 3 things. First of all, the README, I think would benefit from a what does this actually do, which my hope is, and this gets back to the documentation I was talking about earlier, in the Git section would be what do you put in your README, and again, we don't need to write this, but right now just sort of looking at it, I have no idea why I'd want to use it without knowing more than I should based on looking at the README. So that's one thing that we can improve upon, I think, relatively easily. 2, the install is great, but I think, again, maybe the AWS-specific portions could be moved into, again, this sort of how do you code things in this environment with, an example and how to set up some of the cloud-related things. And then the specifics that are specific to this installation could be a subset of that. So maybe we can move some of that into the documentation or the group programming documentation. And then the third thing is with respect to setting goals, which I think is really important. I would, instead of placing them in the GitHub repository, just in a generic sense, I think we should make those issues that are in the repository, and then perhaps mark them as first step goals, or add some sort of tag that identifies that this is something we would like to be able to accomplish using this code as a first pass. And I'm more than willing to add those, but just wanted to be specific that I think would be best in the issues rather than creating another Markdown or RST file in the repository itself.
Completely agree with you.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else, Joe, or any other questions for Joe? Okay. Next on the list, Chris Lindsay.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, unfortunately, really, I don't have much to report, other than I read a lot of the source documents about the extraction process and the feature calculations, but I kind of got lost in translating that into where it all was in the code. The other question I have is, so this probably shows how lost I am in the actual repository, but the feature creation there is separate Python code for that. It's not just in MATLAB, right? Or is it still all done in?
Yes. So the feature calculation we've ported over. So you should be able to take a file that contains mostly just very elementary information about the worm's movement over time, like its contour and its skeleton, the midpoint of the contour there, and its widths and things like that. Just a few other data points, and then it should be taking that data and generating a worm features instance which contains all kinds of features information, again, time series features information about the worm. So that is in Python. That is in the features folder in the movement validation package. So have you been able to run the examples in the example folder? For instance, because that's sort of designed to be the way that you can kind of see how it actually works, how the data is actually transformed from step to step. Yeah, so Jim just linked there to the examples folder.
Yeah, and I think that, so I was able to run a few of these,
okay,
but I think that I'm still running into some issues. Been a few weeks since I had last played around with it. But yeah, I think that last I was testing it or trying to run them, I ran into a few that didn't really produce anything, or that just failed on some missing component or other.
Right.
So,
yeah. I mean, you're basically the first or one of the first end users of this thing. So I'm not surprised that there are issues like that. So my apologies. I think if you're, so that's totally normal, I'm guessing. And if you're having those kinds of issues, I'm happy to like do a Screen Hero session with you or something, and we can look through them together, and then maybe I can figure out where I screwed up or where we screwed up somewhere. And that's basically maybe the next way to proceed there, because I can imagine it being super frustrating. There's like this giant monolithic block of code, and there's some random error, and you're being asked to figure out the next step. So I could totally get why that would be a block on your progress.
And one thing I should throw in there, this is partly my fault. Some of those examples may not be designed to actually run completely. So what I think we'll do going forward, and I'll try and get this done as soon as possible, is add a README for this folder that really explains that. And so, I don't know, I personally sort of like putting READMEs into folders just because, and maybe we could link this from somewhere else, but at least if you're looking at things on GitHub, the README is sort of like a index file that it shows you it when you're in the folder. So in other words, that link that I just provided to you, rather than just seeing the files, you'd also see some descriptive text associated with that folder. And I think what needs to be put in there is the status of these things, or which ones you should run absolutely right away, or in which one are sort of a little bit more esoteric or out there, or, in progress. And I apologize that that's not obvious. But looking at it now, I realize how confusing that can be, so I apologize about that.
I've also tried to use the discipline that every time we do some change to the repo, I try to run all the examples to make sure that they still run. So it's kind of a poor man's regression testing. Make sure that our plotting works, the feature calculation works, the statistics work. So hopefully they all work. And if they don't, it might be as simple as just a misconfiguration of your user config file or something. So yeah. So why don't we take that offline, Chris? I'm happy to talk to you, and then we can, as Jim says, probably good to improve the documentation also.
Yeah, and that's what I just need to sit down with it and go through it systematically and find out what is just a problem with the way my setup and what may be other issues.
Awesome, and that'll just make it stronger. So that's perfect. I got a comment here. I'll report them as issues. Right. Fair enough. Good point. Okay. Anything else, Chris? Any questions for Chris? Okay. Stephen.
All right. So my update is in the time that I've been able to switch off to movement validation stuff from all the other things. So I have moved forward with the data. With the data server. And part of what was slow was me and the uptake and sort of getting bandwidth to get started. But what I found about 2 weeks ago is that even though I had the password for logging in. The login was actually broken in the OS in this itself. You have to understand that this is actually not just a hard drive. It's actually basically a computer. The NAS is itself like a server. It has its own operating system, and so it's running some version of Linux on there. But as you can see, basically as soon as I was putting in the right password, it literally just wasn't able to bring up a shell. So somewhere in shipping, I guess, the OS has gotten hosed. So that was kind of a blocker as of 2 weeks ago. So I decided to get creative, and I built a Linux boot USB stick for this. So I got an Ubuntu ROM, I got a USB stick from the Best Buy, and then I went on to the Thecus forums, understand exactly how to do that, and in the end I didn't end up using anything super fancy because I can just boot it off of there. But then initially it wasn't really coming up on the network. I guess I had a bad like Ethernet cable. That was confusing for a while, and then I changed that out and it came up. And then once I was logged in, though, my Ubuntu still couldn't see the data because essentially this server has a RAID array, makes the hard drives into a RAID array, and you kind of need some OS level support for that. So it took me some time to get that, but after additional hacking and figuring out what are the commands that one runs on the command line to remake the RAID array from the hard drives, I was finally, in Ubuntu, able to see the directory structure of the files, yay, and actually get down to like mat files and that kind of thing. So so that was kind of a flurry of time. It took me like 8 hours or something just to get this much. So, but at least I was able to get the box up on the network, get to see the data, get it logged in, all that kind of good stuff. So. How
about video files? Do you see any video files in there?
Oh,
not sure. You just saw the MATs and.
I'm confident that I have the entire data structure. The thing is like it is a like Byzantine set of directories.
Oh God, yeah.
The directory structure is like insane. It's like look at this, like
it's a deep hierarchy, yeah.
Data, results, LoRa Grundy, gene NA, allele NA, N2, off boot, XX, 30-minute wait, L, tracker, like it's like a 10-level like hierarchy, and literally there's like multiple things at every single level. So I bet they're there, but somebody's gonna have to. Andre sent me a little bit of a guide to where stuff is. So I'm confident it's there. I've sized the disk, and it is in fact the 4.8 terabytes or whatever. So yeah, but no, I haven't actually seen a video file yet, just 'cause I don't know where to look. But yeah. So anyway, so the next steps is I need to install the actual torrent server so that now when this thing is sitting up on the network, folks can access it from the outside. I owe Balash a few specific videos, so I'll just verify for myself that I can in fact transfer the data and that the data are not corrupt. But it looks pretty good, given that I can log in and that kind of thing, and actually get down to the point of seeing files. So sorry it's slow. I was definitely not anticipating that when I turned it on I would not actually be able to get into it, and so that kind of took more time. But now I'll sort of redouble efforts and hopefully get this thing up online here before the next meeting. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, for all your work. That's a tour de force. Amazing. Two things. Number one, in talking to Andre Brown, he said there might be funding for paying for this thing to be, all that video to be sitting on an Amazon S3 storage cluster. Now, that's not cheap because unlike, say, Dropbox or Dropbox, for example, which is hosted also on S3, they obviously have a huge amount of space that they buy from Amazon, and so Amazon gives them discount pricing, whereas we'd be using it as an end user directly of AWS, and so we're paying about 10 times what the Dropbox price is, what the going sort of rate is. So I was calculating that for 5 terabytes, it's about $5,000 a year US, but depending on the amount of use that the the Brown Lab thinks they're going to get out of this, it's possible that we could get funding to have that be hosted. And in which case, maybe the next step would be to create some kind of script that, as Jim points out, we could traverse this directory structure and then drop all that information into some kind of metadata files or something, and then have that eventually get into our database, so that information is all, that metadata about the files is stored in a database, and the files themselves are sitting in a much more flat directory structure. So that's a whole other issue to do, but
Sure, sounds
some
good.
options there.
Yeah, I'm operating under the assumptions that right now the cost for putting it up on cloud storage is prohibitive, but if that ever changes based on funding or based on storage getting cheaper, which I suppose sometime in the next few years will happen, then we can definitely change it around. But this is sort of the tack I'm taking for the moment. And
Sounds good.
yeah, cool. That's my main thing. I think other stuff for tomorrow. I will be interested in Chris Barnes' Python conversion of the CV code, but we can take that up there, and just if we want to try and fork some of that in, and pull request or whatnot. But I think better to probably take it up with him.
To be clear, Chris Barnes did not translate any of the code into Python. He created a whole new approach based on his own ideas. So at no point did we try to translate the original Worm Tracker 2 analysis computer vision code.
Well,
Sorry, I shouldn't say at no point. You obviously, Jim, sorry.
I have translated a unspecified amount of the code. I would have to go back and look, but it's all just a rewrite in MATLAB so that I understood what was going on. We have no Python code that does that. Although I'm redoing a lot of that for the contour skeleton, getting new things into the pipeline. I'm ending up having to rewrite parts of that, and that's actually a big confound. Is that realistically, all you need for video processing is if you can extract a contour, you're all set. Because if you think about it, the feature processing pipeline is really doing, at least in theory, is doing the rest of it. Unfortunately, for some error checking, you basically do everything in the video processing pipeline in order to find bugs in your parsing, and then you redo it again in the feature processing pipeline. So there's a little bit of overlap that's a bit frustrating, and would be nice to get rid of it eventually, but sort of low priority at this point.
Okay.
Got it. So it looks like Tobias dropped out for one reason or another, so we don't get the benefit of his introduction right now, but thanks, Tobias, for participating. Appreciate that. And if you want to reach out to me at some point, let me know if you're watching this offline. I will reach out to him after this meeting, independently of this. And yeah, is there anything else? Otherwise, we're going to see each other in about 10 hours anyway at the next meeting. So anyone else have any contributions or any comments at this point?
One question. You mentioned Screen Hero. Have you actually used it? You like it?
Yeah, I've been using it relatively infrequently, but yes, it's nice because unlike screen sharing in Hangouts, you get to share a mouse. So both users get a mouse, and I get to potentially drive on the other person's computer, or you can flip it around very easily also. So it's billed as it's better than sitting next to the person if you're doing pair programming, because you don't have the awkwardness of having to share one mouse. You get two mice. I've had some bandwidth issues with it, not on my end, but on the other person's end usually. If the bandwidth isn't good, then there's quite a bit of a problem seeing everything properly.
I'm wondering if what anybody thinks just conceptually about trying to do like a virtual hackathon, basically where for a weekend or something, and of course time zones being an interesting component of this, but I don't know that it's completely impossible, where folks sort of get together virtually using Screen Hero and just hack for some chunk of time, even if it's like 4 hours or something, just to get folks together across OpenWorm, and then because I've also seen that there's some more than one-on-one Screen Hero features potentially. That could be used. It would require some inventiveness, but I don't know what folks think, if that might be something they'd be willing to try here.
Well, I like that idea for sure. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds, for me, I think that would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when Michael was first starting, the two of us had a few meetings where we basically just be working on something, and then we didn't have a screen here or whatever, but we just Google Hangout while we were coding and bring up each other's things, and I could make comments on what he had. And so I'm not sure that a full weekend might be difficult, but if we tried to make maybe 4 hours or whatever
Right.
coding times, that might be useful, especially like Chris mentioned, bringing him into some of this code.
Okay, I'm gonna think a little bit more about it. Shop the idea around with some other folks, but
One way to structure it might be something like we're all in a Hangout like this, and then individuals can pair off and go into their own Screen Hero session. A wrinkle with Screen Hero right now is that it was just acquired by Slack, so no one can get a new user right now. There's a couple of months where they're sucking Screen Hero into Slack, and so for now they've disallowed new users. So I happen to have gotten it before that point, so I can invite people into my Screen Hero sessions, but I don't think that you can get a new one right now.
Okay.
But it's not the only app out there. There's all kinds of apps.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay. Well, with that, thanks everyone for showing up today, and super excited about everything that we're doing here. So yeah, just reach out to me if you have any other questions or issues, or Jim or Stephen, any other questions or issues about the way we've structured things, the milestones now. So if anyone wants to jump in, just feel free to do so, or talk to us, and we'll make that happen. Otherwise, as I say, I'll see everyone in about 10 hours for the computer vision meeting if you're attending that. Otherwise, see you all later.
All right. And thanks, Michael and Jim, for organizing.
No problem. Bye, guys.
Yep.
So yeah.